Fantastic. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We're about 1 minute after the hour. Welcome. It is the Monarch Conservation webinar series. We are super excited for our webinar today, and we hope you guys are as well. Let me just pull up. I hope everybody can see our screen all right here. Okay. Today we are going to be talking about Monarchs 101, Back to Basics, presented by Katie-Lyn Puffer. My name is Alyssa Taylor. I am a program coordinator with the Monarch joint venture. I work specifically with the AZA Safe Monarch program, and I am joined today as well by Jenna Tots, who is one of MJV's education coordinators. So we are super excited for our Back to Basics Monarch program today. Before we get started, we do have a few things that we're going to kind of go over a bit. During the webinar today, please put your questions in the Q&A box. So that's at the bottom of your screen. You'll see the little Q&A. We won't be using the chat today. So go ahead and use the Q&A box for any questions. We'll be kind of looking at that, so you can actually click if you want to upvote. If you see a question that somebody asked and you like it and you want to send it to the top, you can upvote those questions by using the little thumb. So feel free to do that or ask any of the questions that you need. We'll be sorting through those and hopefully have time to get through a bunch of them at the end. This webinar is recorded and posted to the Monarch Joint Venture website, and we will have that posted hopefully by the end of this week. And not only will we have this one posted, you can dive deeply into the 9 years worth of Monarch conservation webinars. So you can look on our website and you can look for certain topics and explore what we've kind of discussed over the last 9 years. If you're joining us today, but you didn't pre-register for the 2024 webinar series, we would like to count you for your attendance and be able to send you those follow-up emails with all of our unanswered questions. Just a reminder of where you can find the recorded webinars. So please feel free to email learn@monarchjointventure.org with your name and your email address. Or you can click on the site that we just put in the chat and register there. No problem at all, but it'll be really helpful if you make sure that you do that. And finally, our webinar speakers represent their own viewpoints, which are not necessarily those of the Monarch joint venture. However, in this case, our presenter might actually represent the viewpoints of Monarch joint venture. And without further ado, I am going to introduce our presenter today. We have Katie-Lyn Puffer, who is our education manager for the Monarch joint venture. Katie-Lyn coordinates the education and outreach programs, which include professional development programs for teachers and educators, local programming, public courses, virtual, in-person, you name it, she does it, and we're happy to have her joining us today. She also works to connect partners and the public to resources they need for monarch conservation and education. She was born and raised in southeast Wisconsin and then moved to Minnesota for school and then never left. So she resides currently in the Twin Cities area. She graduated from the University of Minnesota with a degree in environmental sciences, policy, and management. And previous to MJV, Katie-Lyn worked as an informal educator at museums, zoos, nature centers, park systems, and she led and coordinated summer camps, field trips, and outdoor education programs for all ages. Previous to that, or most recently, she was the education program coordinator for the former Monarch Lab, which many of MJV's education programs actually stem from. Katie-Lyn enjoys the opportunities with MJV and working with so many devoted people that are interested in promoting conservation and education. She loves having an integral role in providing them with the tools and skills that they are seeking. So she's very pumped to talk to you today. And in her free time, she can be found hiking, camping, reading, knitting all the time. I can vouch for that, and spending time with her awesome son. And without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pull it on over to Katie-Lyn. Just a reminder, make sure you throw your questions in the Q&A and we'll make sure that we gather those at the end. And welcome, Katie-Lyn. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alyssa. Hi, everybody. I'm Katie-Lyn. Nice to have you all here with us. I'm going to share my screen here and get us going. So today we're just gonna go back to the basics. We're gonna learn about monarchs at the very, very basic level. So some of you maybe already know some of this information. Some of you might know more than others, and some of you this is brand new. So this is meant to be, a basic introduction to monarchs and their life cycle, and just kind of a touch on the conservation aspects of the work that we do here at the Monarch Joint Venture. As Alyssa said, go ahead and drop questions in the Q&A. We should have time at the end to answer some of those. And then we'll also share some resources with you all for where you can go to learn more and dive a little bit deeper. So back to basics. Okay. So the monarch butterfly is probably one of the most well-recognized butterflies on the planet, for sure, probably in North America. I haven't met a single person who didn't have some story to share with me about monarch butterflies, which is what makes them such a great organism to rally around for conservation, the conservation work that we do, not just for monarchs, but for other pollinators and other native wildlife. The scientific name for the monarch butterfly is Danaus plexippus, and there are several other species that share the same genus that start with the Danaus genus. We call them milkweed butterflies or Danaids, but monarchs are by far the most widespread. They have a life cycle just like any other lepidopteran, any other butterfly or moth species that begins as an egg. That egg hatches into a caterpillar, the caterpillar forms a chrysalis, and that chrysalis ecloses into an adult butterfly. But what's special about monarchs is that they have just one type of host plant, and that's milkweed. Milkweed is the monarch's only host plant, although there are dozens, if not hundreds of species of milkweed all over the world for sure. And there's over 100 that are native to the North American continent. So monarch butterflies are sometimes difficult to spot unless you know what you're looking for. So let's go into how to identify them at all of their life stages. The monarch egg is typically the hardest one to find. It doesn't move. It's very well camouflaged. But those eggs can be found on any part of the milkweed plant, from the buds to the stem, to the seed pods, but most often on the leaves of the milkweed plant, usually on the underside, as you can see on this top photo here and this bottom photo here. The eggs look, and it's a little hard to tell on this one, but they're kind of this creamy, yellowy white color on the underside of the leaves. This egg in the middle here on the right side is just getting ready to hatch. That's what this black part is at the top here. It's the head of the caterpillar inside that egg. And that caterpillar will chew its way out of that egg within the next few hours here. But you'll notice that there's all of these striations along this egg here. And that's how you know it's a monarch egg and not something else called a sap dollop. Oh, and my formatting did do funky things when I downloaded this. So you can see those striations here on this photo. And a little bit here, although it's a little bit grainy. But when you're looking for monarch eggs, keep an eye out for sap dollops. I get fooled every spring. It's for those of you who are in the Midwest, it's snowing here in Minnesota right now. It's coming out my window on the other side of my laptop screen here. So when monarchs return to Minnesota in late May and early June, I get really excited looking at all the milkweed plants. And, I've been doing this long enough that I feel like I can spot a monarch egg from, several feet away. But without fail, every year I see something on the milkweed plant and I go to look and it's not an egg, it's a sap dollop. So these latex drops are secreted by the milkweed leaves, by most species of milkweed, when the leaves are damaged or broken. And that can happen in a variety of ways. Usually it's just torn by something walking past it, or damaged in a storm or something like that. Sometimes it's damaged by animals, whether those are other insects or something else that might be gnawing on it. But those leaves secrete this sap to help protect the plant. And milkweed sap is toxic. So don't eat it. It doesn't taste good. I'm not expecting that you would anyway, but it doesn't really pose any threat really to humans or our pets or anything like that. It just doesn't taste good. And if you get it in your eyes, it can sting a little bit. But for the most part, those toxins are only harmful in really large quantities. And most animals aren't going to get to those large quantities without feeling sick first. But those toxins are called cardenalides, and if Alyssa or Jenna could drop that in the chat so people can see how it's spelled. Cardiac glycosides or cardenalides is what they're called, and monarchs sequester those toxins. They hold those toxins in their bodies. Their body is able to withstand them and hang on to them, and thus they become toxic to other things that try to eat them. Not necessarily other insects or invertebrates, but more like birds and frogs and small mammals and things like that. Things are still eating them, but not at the quantities they would if monarchs were not toxic themselves. Okay, so once those eggs hatch, we have larvae, caterpillars. The plural of larva, which is one caterpillar, is larvae, which is more than one. And monarchs are well known for their beautiful yellow, black, and white striping, although most people don't usually see them until they get to this larger instar. And I'll go through in a second here how to tell those instars apart, but I want to define that word for you first. An instar is the scientific word for the period between larval molts. So every time a caterpillar or invertebrate, insect in general molts, each stage between that molt is called an instar. Monarchs have 5 of them. So when they first hatch, they are a first instar. First instars are so small, just millimeters long. You can identify them by their completely black head. They do have tentacles, but they're just barely visible. Some people can see them without the aid of a hand lens or a magnifying lens, but some people, I would say most people cannot. But if you were to look at them close up, you would see those tentacles just behind the head here. They don't have any stripes when they first hatch, as you can see by these two images on the left here. The caterpillar on the top left here is eating its egg casing. That is the first thing that most monarch caterpillars eat when they hatch, is their egg casing. And part of that is to recycle the nutrients, and part of that is to, help camouflage them a little bit more, make it harder for them to find, not leaving that much evidence behind them. So they don't start getting their stripes until they start eating the milkweed itself. And depending on the species of milkweed that they're laid on, sometimes they just eat the little hairs on the milkweed, like you can see on this photograph on the right. And sometimes they're eating the leaf itself. As they grow, they'll start to eat more, but you can see this picture on the right. This caterpillar does have some stripes on it, but they're not very bold. They're kind of dull, and that's normal. And this is still a monarch caterpillar. It just doesn't look like what most people recognize as a monarch caterpillar. First instars, when they do start eating the leaves, will tend to eat in very, very small holes, often in like a crescent shape around on the leaves. A few days after that egg hatches into the first instar, it will molt for the first time into a second instar. And the second instar isn't that much bigger than the first. And you can tell them apart from the first instar by looking at their heads and the length of their tentacles. I would caution against using the size of the caterpillar to tell you what instar it is, because you can have a first instar caterpillar that is the same size as a second instar caterpillar, particularly if that first instar caterpillar is getting ready to molt and the second instar caterpillar has just molted. So on the second instar caterpillar, their head has yellow stripes now. The front tentacles are now visible, but still small. To me, they kind of remind me in the second instar stage, like little cat ears, like feline cat ears, not caterpillar cat ears. But they've kind of got that triangular shape about them a little bit, a very long triangle, but they are visible. The yellow and black stripes are now always visible on the body of the caterpillar. And again, the second instar caterpillar will chew small holes in the leaves, much like the first instar, but slightly larger because they are slightly larger caterpillars. A few days after they molt into a second instar, they'll be molting into a third instar. Again, the head has yellow stripes. There are much larger chew holes on the leaves when a third instar is eating on them, and those holes are often just like chunks taken out of the edge of the leaves. So like you can see in this center photo here, this caterpillar is just kind of chewing from the edge of the leaf into the center. Now, the third instar's front tentacles, if you were to bend them forward, I don't recommend doing that, but if you can kind of visualize it, if they were to get bent forward, they would reach just to the front of the head. And you can sort of see that this caterpillar is a little bit scrunched up here on the right side. But you can see the front tentacles of this caterpillar. If they were to bend downward, they would reach just to the tip of the head of this caterpillar here. A few days later, they molt into a fourth instar. This is when most people start to see monarchs on their plants. These fourth instar larvae are quite large compared to when they first hatch. The front tentacles of a fourth instar are still relatively straight, although sometimes they can be a little droopy, but they would reach past the head, beyond the head. The fifth instar, which is again when a lot of other people start to notice the larvae on their plants, this is when the front tentacles start to look kind of droopy, as you can see in this top photo here. They reach well beyond the head, are often droopy, and they have a unique feeding behavior that other instars don't have. And it's starting to be demonstrated in the lower right hand photo here. This fifth instar is notching the base of this leaf on this milkweed here to prevent the flow of sap from reaching the rest of the leaf. They need the sap because it gives them their protection, their toxins, but if it comes out too quickly, their mandibles can get gummed up and stuck together, which means they wouldn't be able to eat. So what the fifth instars do is notch this petiole of the leaf, the stem of the leaf on the plant, and then turn around and eat from the tip of the leaf all the way to the back to the stem. And you can see this caterpillar has already done that on the leaf across from it and the two below it. Fifth instars have a voracious appetite. One other thing I will note about fifth instars is that you will sometimes, and this is true for any instar, you'll sometimes find caterpillars that are not on milkweed, and they're there for a reason. In fifth instars, they're usually leaving the milkweed because they're going to find a place to form their chrysalis. In other instars, fourth, third, second, or first, they're usually leaving the plant to self-regulate or to find a safe place to molt. So if you think of, how hot it can get during the summer months, a caterpillar might leave the leaf that it's eating on to go cool itself down, find some shade. It doesn't take much to heat up a caterpillar, but then it doesn't take much to cool one down either. So they're just moving around to self-regulate their body temperature. So if you see a monarch caterpillar and it's not on a milkweed plant, just leave it. It's left the plant for a reason, and you'd probably be doing more harm than good by trying to put it back on the plant, because it's just going to be leaving again to go do what it needs to do to either regulate its temperature or to find a place to form its chrysalis. And then you're making it so that it has to use more energy to do those things, because it's got to repeat what it's already tried doing. All right, so after the fifth instar has eaten its fill of milkweed, it will leave the milkweed plant to find a place to form its chrysalis. And normally those are not on the milkweed plant, although as you'll see in my next set of slides, that's not always the case. But they often leave the milkweed plant to go find a safe place to do this. They're looking for a specific microclimate, but sometimes the only thing that's available to them is the milkweed plant. So these two images here are pictures that I found in the same summer. It's the closest I've ever come to finding wild monarch chrysalises or pupae. The one on the left is a J stage caterpillar. This is the stage just before it pupates, just before it forms its chrysalis. So it'll spin a silk button at the top of wherever it's going to hang from, and then hang from that silk button upside down for 12 to 16 hours, depending on temperature and things like that. And then it will molt one last time into the pupa. And then the pupa, the chrysalis on the right, I just happened to park next to this blade of grass that it was on, and it was literally right outside my car door when I got out of my car. It was next to a big field of wildflowers up here in central Minnesota. So I got really lucky that day to see this. I was very excited, and I've never seen one in the wild since. I've seen them on the side of my house, but I've never seen one in the wild. This is the only true chrysalis that I've ever seen in the wild. And I'll say this one on the left, this J caterpillar, was found in a garden, a very wet garden. You can see it was raining that day, but you can actually see the milkweed plant behind it. This is milkweed just behind it. And then this plant that it's on is not milkweed. I don't know what plant it is, but it's not milkweed. So, okay. So when a caterpillar is ready, as I mentioned, it will hang upside down in the J stage. And then as it's ready to pupate, it will straighten its body back up. It will, the skin just behind its head here, kind of in what you might think of as our shoulders, or the equivalent of shoulders on a caterpillar. They don't have shoulders because they don't have a skeleton, but the equivalent space of like center upper back. They split their skin, and you can see that in this second image here. They split their skin one final time, and the pupa is underneath. So you know, a lot of people might think of like, oh, it's spinning a pupa or it's spinning a chrysalis. That's not what butterflies are doing. They do spin silk, and you can see that up here at the top of this leaf, which does happen to be milkweed. But the pupa is just one molt away after the fifth instar. So the pupal skin is present underneath the skin of the fifth instar, and that's what's happening here. It kind of looks like this weird green alien worm thing coming out. But this is the pupa. This is what they look like when they first molt that final time into the pupa stage. And you'll see this is the old skin in the center top photo here. And then there's this weird kind of stem-like structure here. That's called a cremaster. Oh, let me type that for you in the chat there. That's called a cremaster, and it's a very specific appendage or part of the body that's only found in the pupal stage. The cremaster's job is to hold the pupa up in the to attach itself to the silk button that has been spun. So from like this left-hand stage to the center stage, as this skin is shimmying up its body, that cremaster is getting ready to come out of where the skin is peeling away and get inserted into this silk button. And the cremaster, if you think of like crochet hooks, and actually I have one here on my desk. So like crochet hooks, it's covered in these little tiny hooks, like a crochet hook, almost like Velcro, to attach itself, and there's just hundreds of them on here, to attach itself into each individual thread on this silk button. And so when you see a monarch pupa kind of wiggling around, we call that the pupa dance. What they're doing is trying to secure that cremaster into the silk button as much as it can. So you'll kind of see it wiggling back and forth a lot, not only to get this old skin off, but to also secure itself into the cremaster. So this top photo, the second one from the right, is a brand new, newly molted chrysalis. You'll notice it's kind of got green and whitish yellow striping. It doesn't really look like what you think a monarch pupa looks like, but over the next 30 minutes or so, this pupa will harden into the shape that's on the upper right hand corner, what we recognize, that bright gray, jade green color of the monarch pupa. So it hardens over the next 30 minutes or so, and then it sits completely still for another 10 to 14 days. So the egg lasts about 3 to 5 days. The larval stage lasts 10 to 14 days, give or take a day or two, depending on temperature. And then the pupal stage lasts about another 2 weeks or so. Again, give or take a few days, depending on temperature. And then we'll switch to this bottom sequence here. The color or the pigment of the butterfly starts to show through this pupal casing. And a lot of people will see this and be like, oh, it's going clear, I can see the butterfly, but you've been able to see the butterfly the whole time. If you look carefully back at this upper right-hand corner, and I apologize if you can't see it on your screen, but I'll try to share out some pictures post-webinar. If you look carefully, you'll see this shape here is the wing of the butterfly. You can see the veins of the wing. And it's again a little hard to tell, but you can see these little indentations here along the abdomen of this pupa, and you can see them here too. Those are spiracles, what the butterfly breathes through. So the butterfly parts are all there from the beginning of this stage, and actually all of the cells for the butterfly body parts were present from the larval stage. They've just been developing internally, kind of like peeling back layers of an onion almost. Everything is there. It's just not quite ready to be up front yet. So the last, 24 hours or so of the life stage of the pupa, that's when the pigment is formed. That's the very last thing to form before that butterfly is ready to eclose, to come out of the chrysalis. So when that happens, when that's ready to go, the pupal casing will break open, and then that butterfly will plop right out, as you can see here. And the difference between the picture on the bottom right and the second from the bottom right is very different. You'll notice that the abdomen is very, very plump, and the wings are very, very small. So what this butterfly is going to do over the next 30 minutes or so is pulse that abdomen, much like a heartbeat, and inflate its wings to their full size. And then it will hang upside down for another 3, 4, 5 hours or so to allow those wings to dry flat and straight so that it can fly later. So this can be a very vulnerable stage for this butterfly because it can't fly yet, and it can't really walk. I mean, it can, but not very well and not very fast because its wings are floppy and heavy and wet. And so if these wings don't dry flat and straight, they won't be able to fly. So in all, from the time the egg hatches to the time this butterfly comes out, it's about a month or so. And then the adult butterfly that breeds during the summer months lives anywhere between 2 to 6 weeks. And that depends on resources and predation and other types of population pressures. However, the butterflies that migrate, and I'll talk about the migration in a minute here, the butterflies that migrate are in a state of reproductive diapause, which means that while they look, I was supposed to have an animation there and it didn't work. While they look like fully grown adults, because they are, their reproductive organs are not fully mature yet. So this allows the monarchs to prolong their life and complete the migration by delaying mating until conditions are more favorable. And I apologize for the dull color here. Again, I'll try to share out some photos in it post-webinar here, but we've got the male on the right and the female on the left, and I'll point out what's the difference here by circling, and I'm going to put my laser pointer out here. By circling here, you can see these dots on either side of the abdomen are what distinguish the male from the female. The female does not have those dots. So that's how you can tell the difference just at a glance between a male adult and a female adult. There are other ways, but that's the most obvious. Okay, on to migration. We're in the spring migration right now, but we're going to start in the fall as if we just gotten through a beautiful summer instead of a long winter. So fall migration occurs between August and November. And it's the final generation of the year that migrates to either central Mexico down here, or coastal California. And they do this over a couple of months, several months really, because they're in reproductive diapause. They're not looking for mates along the way. They're just looking for nectar resources and places to roost, to rest at night. But it takes a couple of months for them to get to their final winter resting homes on the coast of California or central Mexico. This overwintering generation, because they are in reproductive diapause, can live up to 9 months. And you'll remember I said the monarchs that are breeding live on average somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks. We say usually about a month as adults. So that's like 7 to 9 times longer as a migratory generation, because they are not only delaying breeding and mating, but they're also going to places in the world that are just kind of these Goldilocks conditions. In Western North America, monarchs will spend the winter in groves of eucalyptus and Monterey pine and cypress trees along the California coast. And these roosts can range in size from just a few monarchs to several hundred or several thousand. It depends on the year. Monarchs east of the Rocky Mountains spend their winters in OML fir forests west of Mexico City in the mountains of the Transvolcanic mountain range. And there are anywhere between 5 to 15 colonies of monarchs that range in size from just a few trees to a few acres of trees. And again, this varies from year to year. But they're just sitting there waiting for conditions to be right again. Most of the time, that's all they do. But on sunny days, they'll fly around. They'll go find places to drink water from puddles and things like that. Later in the season, as the flowers start to bloom, they'll start drinking nectar. But for the most part, they're just resting. They're waiting for conditions to be right again. They're waiting for the sun to get higher in the sky. They're waiting for the days to get warmer. They're waiting for the days to get longer. And for those nectar resources to become available before they start flying north again. They begin flying north right around now. February and March is when monarchs start to leave their overwintering homes. Sometime, depending on which population you're looking at, the Western population tends to leave a little bit earlier than the Eastern population. But usually, late February, early March is on average when they start to leave, and they fly north again, or northeast, depending on which population we're looking at. So they've spent November through March overwintering in their perfect overwintering sites, the perfect conditions. And then from February or March through April, they're flying northward and they breed along the way. They've come out of diapause, they start mating and lay eggs along the way. Those eggs that are laid in the southern US or the Central Valley of California are generation 1, the first generation of the year. The adults that were overwintering die. They've completed their life's purpose. They've reached the end of their life cycle. And their offspring, that first generation, are what complete the migration to the rest of their breeding grounds. And then from March through August are generations 2 and 3, and sometimes 4, if you're here in certain parts of the country or southern Canada. So generations 2, 3, and sometimes 4 are what we see here in my part of the world in Minnesota. Monarchs here in Minnesota, just for a frame of reference, I'm like here where this red dot is now, somewhere around there. We don't usually see monarchs return here until the earliest I've ever seen a monarch is like mid-May. But typically it's not till the end of May or early June. But I always see my first egg before I see my first butterfly. So to recap the migration, it takes 4 to 5 generations to complete this migration. The migration on an annual cycle begins in August. Those fall butterflies migrate to the coast of California or central Mexico, all in one generation. They'll stop and nectar along the way, they'll stop and roost along the way, but they're not mating for the most part. There's some mating observed, but those monarchs that are mating don't make it to the overwintering sites, but their offspring would. They spend the winter months there, November through March, and then beginning in February or March, they begin their northward migration into the southern US or Central Valley of California, and then continue the migration northward to the remainder of their overwinter or their breeding grounds. And then that whole cycle starts over again the following August. So 4 to 5 generations to complete. And this is what is probably the most amazing thing to me about monarch butterflies, is that the monarchs that overwinter in California and Mexico have never been there before, and they'll never be there again. And yet every single monarchs that has been there, not only did they start on one milkweed plant, but from generation after generation after generation for thousands of years, as far back as we can go into, cultural memory, monarchs have been migrating this way without ever having been there before and never being back there again. And yet they are finding the same sites, which to me is amazing. So one of the big questions we get at MJV is do Western monarchs ever overwinter in Mexico? And the short answer to that is yes. And the reverse is also true. There is some mixing of the populations. This study put out by Billings et al. In 2020 used tagging data from the West, from Arizona, to see where monarchs were going. And to make a long story short, there were monarchs tagged on different days. Some were found in California and some were found in Mexico. So we know that the populations mix. But they are divided by the Rocky Mountains, even though they mix, not just during the fall migration, but it's likely that monarchs from Mexico, they go left instead of right around the mountains. So it's possible that there's some mixing there too, but that has not been demonstrated in any data yet. So the other cool thing about the fact that monarchs all generally go to the same is that it makes it really easy to estimate the population. So we'll start with the Eastern monarchs. This is a photo that was taken in the 1980s by Dr. Lincoln Brower. All of these orange trees are covered in butterflies. That's why they're orange. So when scientists in Mexico go to count monarchs, they geotag, they start in one area, they geotag it, and then they're measuring all around the perimeter of this colony and taking the area of that colony. And it allows us to get graphs that look like this. And I don't know why it did not switch. I swear I changed this graph. I will make sure that you guys get the updated graph. I swear I changed this morning. Alyssa knows I did because I told her I did it. It didn't change. The overwintering count for monarchs this year was 0.9 hectares, which is right about where my cursor is right here. So this graph, to help you read it, along the x-axis on the bottom is the number of years. So from 1993 to the winter of 2023 and 2024, we've got about a 30-year history of data that has been collected by scientists tracking the ups and downs of the monarch population. The y-axis shows the area, the total forest area occupied by monarch colonies in hectares. So you can see that there's a lot of ups and downs. It is normal for a population to have ups and downs, but if we were to put a trend line in this graph here, it would have a very distinctive downward trend. If we were to take 10-year averages, the average of the first 10 years, first decade of this graph, and then the middle decade of this graph and the lower decade of this graph would also have a declining trend. We are below a 3, I believe, I think it's about 3 or 4 hectare average for the last 10 years. Our goal is to have 6 hectares of monarchs overwintering in Mexico. That's been what's shown based on lots of ecological modeling. That's what's been shown to have the greatest chance that monarchs would be able to recover in the event that something catastrophic happened, like a bad winter storm or drought or something like that. Now, in California, monarchs are counted a little bit differently. We are able to, and by we, it's a collective we of like monarch conservationists in general. The program that counts Western monarchs, it's the Western Monarch Count. It's usually done around Thanksgiving and New Year's, and the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation heads that up. And they estimate them by number of individuals reported, not by how much space they take up, because there are over 200 overwintering sites dotted along the California coast. And there are volunteers that go out to all of the ones that are easily accessible, publicly accessible, and estimate the number of monarchs there. So this graph, again, year, time on the bottom, number of individuals on the y-axis over here on the left, and then there's another axis on the right, the number of sites monitored. That's what this blue line is. So you'll see the number of sites monitored in blue, and you'll notice that number is increasing, but the number of monarchs themselves has been decreasing or staying about the same. These 3 years, 2018, 2019, and 2020 were really dismal years. 2020 was the worst. There were fewer than 2,000 butterflies counted in all of California, coastal California that year. So with these downward trends, a lot of people ask us why monarchs are declining, and the biggest threats to them are actually people. Human-driven threats, habitat loss, climate change, and I didn't put it on this slide, but pesticide use, irresponsible uses of pesticides. Loss of breeding habitat and hotter weather are associated with lower monarch populations. When their once beautiful grasslands now look like urban and suburban concrete and things like that, this is now the only places we have left to put more habitat in the ground. These also produce heat island effects where, cities are getting a lot hotter than the countryside, by several tens or dozens of degrees. So these are things that we can change. We can put habitat where things are left, but we also need to be thinking about how and where we're putting that, and being mindful about it, but also being mindful about how we care for it, and being careful about what types of plants we choose and whether or not they've been treated with pesticides, and then not using pesticides, insecticides specifically ourselves, or if we do need to use them, using them as instructed on the bottle, and using them sparingly. There are also concerns with, huge concerns with climate change. Climate change it's happening. Coming from a northern state, we had like the snow that we've gotten over the last 2 days is the most snow we've gotten all winter, and it's not even that much. It's like maybe 8 inches what I got at my house here, and that's not typical for Minnesota. Climate change is real. Climate change is happening. The weather patterns are shifting, and that is a concern also. So doing what you can to mitigate the effects of climate change can also help monarch butterflies. The things that we need to keep an eye on, but aren't necessarily the biggest concerns right now, are those natural threats: predators, parasites, and weather. A rainstorm isn't going to harm monarch butterflies. They're able to withstand lots of different kinds of weather. They can even withstand freezing weather. There are lots of predators that monarchs have. Invertebrates are the most common. Most monarchs don't actually make it to be even a 5th instar caterpillar because they get eaten by other things. Only about 2 to 5% of those eggs that are laid make it to adulthood, and a female monarch can lay anywhere between 300 and 500 eggs in their lifetime. So only 10 to 20 of those eggs are making it. There are many, many, many natural causes of death, but the way monarchs have evolved, that's the strategy that they've been selected for, is to have lots of babies, lay lots of eggs in the hopes that more of them will survive to adulthood. And that strategy has served them well so far when things are in balance. And right now that balance is not quite there. There are also vertebrate predators that monarchs face. This upper left picture is a black-headed grosbeak in Mexico, just sort of feasting on monarchs. But like I said, most of their predators are other invertebrates: spiders, wasps, stink bugs, ladybugs. Yes, I said ladybugs. Ladybugs will eat eggs and small larvae. Monarchs are currently on the IUCN red list as threatened. The red list is not the same as the US endangered species list. It does not provide any protections or regulations or anything like that. It's just a status assessment. The IUCN Red List assessment and the Endangered Species Act assessment are similar, and they came to similar results. So monarchs in the United States are currently listed as a candidate species for the Endangered Species Act. This has been going on since 2014, 10 years now or so. In 2020, they were listed, or the decision came down that listing them was warranted but precluded by other higher priority species. And since then, they've been doing an annual review, and the decision for whether or not they will be listed will happen at the end of this year. So with all of that, take heart, have hope. There are lots of people working on this. The Monarch Joint Venture Partnership as a whole and individually as organizations, we're all doing things to help monarch butterflies. There are things happening in other countries, Canada and Mexico. Monarchs don't care about borders or anything like that. They're not a political being, right? They just fly where the milkweed is. There are groups in Canada and Mexico and everywhere in between working to protect monarch butterflies. They are some of the most heavily monitored organisms on the planet. Someone somewhere is monitoring some part of the monarch life cycle at any given point during the year. We got eyes on this. There are plans through the Safe Monarch program that Alyssa coordinates. There are plans through the Midwest Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and all of the states that belong there. Same with the Western Association for Fish and Wildlife Agencies. MJV has a plan. We'll be updating it and launching that this year as well. So a lot of people also ask us, what can you do? I'll tell you. There's lots you can do. First, we need to think about what monarchs need. Their basic needs are the same as any other organisms: food, water, shelter, space, right? They need a place to live. So the best thing that you can do, you've already started exploring and learning more. From here, you can jump to the next step and plant habitat. Habitat looks different everywhere, but you want to look for things that grow well in your area. Choose a sunny spot, include windbreaks, prepare the soil, and take note of your soil type so you know what plants grow best in your area. You want to find nurseries that sell native, untreated plants, meaning they are free of pesticides. Decide whether you're going to use seeds or plugs. Plugs are established plants that tend to establish better or more quickly in your space. You want to aim for high species diversity, but start small. Start with just a few things that you know you can take care of and go from there. You don't have to go big. You know, it's not a go big or go home sort of situation. Start small. And then include host plants for larvae. Make sure that your species are varying in bloom time. You want something blooming throughout the entire growing season, different colors, different shapes, different heights as you go through your garden and start planting things. And then be sure, like I said, to include host plants. That's not just milkweed, that's host plants for other organisms as well. And we'll be sure to share out some resources for you on how to find those plants in your area. Remember, there are tens, dozens of different species that are native to North America. Look for what's native to your region in local native plant guides. There's a few here on this slide here. One caution is to avoid tropical milkweed, no matter where you are. It is not native, and there's lots of research showing that it can perpetuate disease and winter breeding, which is not good for the monarch population. And then finally, some other ways that you can help monarchs: collecting data through community science. I'll show some logos on the next slide. Use pesticides and herbicides responsibly. Share your knowledge. Tell everybody what you know, what you learned on this webinar here today. Take climate action, and then finally donate to conservation organizations like the Monarch Joint Venture, where we can amplify your dollars into places that need them most. Here are some examples for different community science programs. The Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, there's another training coming up later in April if you want to register for that. For those of you in the West, the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper or Southwest Monarch Study, and then nationally, Journey North, Monarch Watch tagging in the fall, or Project Monarch Health are great ways to help us contribute to the collective body of knowledge about monarchs. We can't do this alone, so let's work together and we'll make a difference for monarchs. And I believe I am done exactly on time. So let's go for some questions.
You are perfectly done, exactly on time. A beautiful ending slide.
So
we have a ton of questions. Katie-Lyn ran through a lot of info for you guys. Remember to put your questions in the Q&A. Even if we do not get to them today, just know that when we send out our recap for this webinar, a reminder where we post everything afterwards so that you can kind of absorb all the things that Katie-Lyn was talking about. Those things will be answered in that email as well. So don't fret if your question has not been answered, and don't feel like you can't continue to ask questions at this time. So I'm going to start out with a few quick questions. Nobody asked this, but we've asked every webinar host thus far, and we're going to ask you as well. What is your favorite milkweed species?
I knew that was coming and I have an answer. It's swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata. I love it. It just is so beautiful and it smells amazing. And I need to get it back in my garden. I had one plant and it died last year. So
the more the merrier, right? So I'm gonna just kind of go through a couple of questions that kind of link together a little bit. Is there a specific milkweed species that they prefer, or is it just any milkweed species?
This is an interesting question. I learned of a study recently that had shown that they did prefer a certain species over another in that specific study in those specific cases. So I don't remember what species it was. However, I never tell anybody to plant only one type or only a couple of types. Plant what's native. They can't use it at all if it's not there. I have never noticed a difference in the plants in my yard. Most of the milkweed in my yard is common milkweed because that's what common milkweed does. It just kind of spreads and takes over, and I'm fine with that. But I've heard different people say, oh, they only seem to lay eggs on this type of milkweed in my yard, or they only see, and then, I'll hear something totally different from someone just a few miles away. So keep in mind that it's not just the species that are affecting their decision-making. It's also your soil type, your water availability, drought conditions, things like that. And different species do different things in different types of conditions. So plant a variety. I always, diversity is better. It makes the whole ecosystem stronger. So don't make just like one monoculture of one type. Plant a lot of different types if you're able to.
Biodiversity supports biodiversity, so just remember that.
Exactly.
Here's a couple of kind of biology questions when it comes to the monarch. Firstly, do caterpillars have eyes?
They do. There is a diagram on our website that I will try to find and have us share out in the link, unless Jenna or Alyssa find it first. But they do have eyes, but they're not like people eyes or mammal eyes, and they're not even compound eyes. Caterpillars have simple eyes, which really just sort of distinguish fuzzy shapes and shadows. So when I teach kids, I always tell them, okay, go look up at the bright light with your eyes closed and then pass your hand over your face. Can you tell when your hand is over your eyes? And you can. And that's kind of like, that's kind of like how caterpillars see. It's not quite like that, but being mammals, we can't really simulate it the same way. But they do have eyes. They're just not very good. They sense with their antennae, which are actually on their chin, so that they can tell if they're on milkweed or not. So they don't really need eyes.
So that brings me to the follow-up question. Well, not necessarily a follow-up question, but a little bit more about our caterpillars and their biology. What is the purpose of the tentacles, and how do caterpillars actually breathe?
So the purpose of the tentacles is sensory, but the tentacles are not antennae. Antennae are much more sensitive, and the antennae are actually on the around the mouth of the caterpillar on their chin, and you can see that on the diagram that we'll share out in the follow-up email. The tentacles do have sensory, you know, if something touches them, they'll be able to tell. They can move them independently from another. But you'll also notice that they have a pair in the front and a pair in the back, and they look, sorry, I got to center myself. They look very identical. One's longer than the other, but that's to fool predators into thinking their head is their butt and their butt is their head, right? Anterior, posterior ends. Lots of organisms do that. You know, a caterpillar is much more likely to be able to survive a head strike to their abdomen versus a head strike to their head. So that's why that is. And then caterpillars breathe the same way that other insects do, through spiracles. If you want to type that into the chat, Alyssa, so people can see how that's spelled. They're just little breathing tubes where gas exchange happens that are connected to, you know, trachea inside their body. And you can, if you have a high enough magnification, it's really not that high. It's maybe 5 or 10 magnification on a hand lens, and you can get a caterpillar to hold still long enough. And you look at the black stripes on a larger instar caterpillar, you can actually see those little holes, those spiracles. If you can get a close enough look. And I'll see if I can find a picture of that too, also to share out. I don't know if there's one on our website, but I could probably find one on a quick internet search somewhere.
Awesome.
But yeah, spiracles.
Okay, I have one more kind of like biology question. This is about the adult monarchs, and it is, do the monarchs find the milkweed by smell?
Oh, that's a great question. The short answer is yes. In the closest analog to how insects smell compared to mammals, they do sense the chemicals in milkweed in their antennae as they're flying around, and I think in their feet also, and kind of hone in on where the milkweed is before they land. I'm not fully clear on all of the mechanics of that, but that has been studied, that monarchs can sense milkweed from a surprising distance away. I feel like it's like a mile, something like that, where they can just kind of smell it through their antennae. They don't have like olfactory senses like we do in their noses. They don't have noses. They sense everything through their antennae and their feet.
Awesome. Okay, so moving away from the adult monarch and the caterpillar, and now going to the chrysalis. Well, sort of in between a little bit. How far from the milkweed will they kind of move to actually form the chrysalis? And would there be a buffer that could be valuable, if we know that answer, that could help kind of support that habitat?
That's a great question. This isn't like super well studied because it's really hard to find chrysalises in the wild and, you know, track a caterpillar through its whole process. But there have been, I've seen chrysalises like 20 feet up on a building, maybe not quite that high, maybe 15 feet up on like the eaves of a building. I've seen them, you know, 30 meters away from any milkweed plant that they could be. And I know lots of other people have seen similar things. So don't just look over, look up. But as far as like a buffer, I don't know that that's fully necessary or even well studied enough to know whether or not we could or should do that. I would say that as long as you have diverse native plants and, you know, some sort of wind protection, trees, shrubs, even a fence would work. I think that would be sufficient, but monarchs and really any caterpillar will form their chrysalis anywhere. I've seen chrysalises on the side of my house. Somebody sent me a picture of a chrysalis that had formed on the can opener in their garage where there wasn't milkweed, like it had crawled in through their door. A naturalist somewhere showed me a picture of a monarch in a chrysalis that had formed in the nasal cavity of a bear skull they had. It just looked like a booger in the skull. So yeah, they'll form their chrysalis anywhere. It's just kind of up to them. We can't really control that. It's just making sure that they have space to do it. Yeah, they'll surprise you.
Okay, I'm gonna try and get one more. I know it's 3 o'clock. I'm gonna ask one more question if you can. I know everybody asked so much. We are gonna work as a group to kind of address all these and make sure that we get them out to you. And these will be sent out to everybody that was registered for this webinar. So just remember, if you didn't get a chance to register and you want this info, you want all the answers to these great questions, make sure you email at learn@monarchjointventure.org. So last question, hang on to it. And the last question is going to be, if a chrysalis is endangered of being harmed, to protect it, is it better to leave it where it is, where it's attached and cage it, or should we put a safety barrier around it, or should we move it? What's best case scenario?
My answer is always to leave nature be. A former colleague at Monarch Watch, she's no longer there. Her name was Angie. She said something once that has stuck with me. We cannot conserve one species at the expense of another. And that includes monarchs. We can't conserve monarchs by excluding them from being a part of the ecosystem that they're already a part of. So by removing them from the ecosystem or protecting them from predators, we're then removing something from the ecosystem that other organisms benefit from. And that includes monarchs. Monarchs are part of a very, very complex ecosystem and food web. And so I would say leave it. Those pictures on that predator slide, 3 of those 5 were mine, and they happened right outside my front door. And I did nothing to stop it because, you know, the spiders got to eat too. So do the other, you know, the stink bugs and the ladybugs and things like that. So my answer is always to let nature be. And actually, I'll add another caveat to that. If you're in California, you have to let it be because you're not allowed to do anything else to it. It's illegal to do anything in situ or ex situ to collect or preserve monarchs. So other than creating habitat for them.
Awesome. Okay, well, I have kept us over 2 minutes. I want to thank Katie-Lyn for providing such fantastic information. Remember, this is going to be recorded, so you don't have to remember it all. That's the best part. You can come back to the MJV website, check it out again. Reminder that we will have another webinar next month, and we hope to see you there. It's going to be our Tri-National Monarch Conservation webinar. We will have representatives from the World Wildlife Federation of Mexico, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Environment and Climate Change of Canada. So we will kind of have time for each one of them to let us know and give us kind of a brief overview of what each country is kind of doing in the world of monarch and pollinator conservation. So we hope you can join us. If you're not registered, make sure you get registered and you'll get all of those links. But other than that, thank you all so much for joining us, and keep a lookout for our email at the end of this week.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. Stay safe
Thank
if you're
you.
in the snowy areas.
Bye.